Okay, Year 12, welcome to your video tutorial on standard modules used in software solutions. Standard, common, average. Modules. We're looking today at common modules. Now, a standard module is a piece of code that performs a standard function and may be used in a variety of different applications. Okay. When we're looking at standard modules, we know what standard modules are. Examples of standard modules exist within all of our programming languages. We've just referred to them in the past as library functions or procedures, and that's fine. A library function is a standard module. So for example, a random function in Visual Basic, that's a library function, which is a standard module. It is a piece of code that has been pre-written and is reused over and over and over again, because in most programming languages, and commonly developers who are using that language will need to use a random function. So a standard module has been written so it can be reused. We need to reuse these standards because we need to make sure our code is efficient. Now, you've just passed random functions. Imagine if you had to write the code to actually make that random function work. Okay, imagine you had a date function in your language. Imagine if you actually had to write the code to actually make the date function work. Okay, we just take for granted that there are all these standard modules within programming languages, but someone did have to write them, and a developer did have to develop them, and they developed it so that people using that particular language could work way more efficiently, because these are standard tasks that a majority of developers would need to use, and instead of having to write all of these standard modules individually themselves, it's an average or a common task. Developers have written them into the language, so all that the other people on the other end have to do is type in the function name and they're good to go. Here is the thing though. The developers who develop these standard modules into the language, so a random function in Java, so a physics module in Lua, so a date function in PHP. Yeah, all of these different standard modules for reuse by a community need to have a certain amount of documentation surrounding them. Okay, this is what is required to develop a standard module. Okay, so they need to have the author's name in there. They also need to have the date of development. They need to have the purpose of why you'd use it, and they also have to have the order and the nature of the parameters that are passed. Surplus information that you usually find in documentation is also examples. Okay, so these are the basics of what they need to have. Now, to be honest, I'm going to be honest here, author's name isn't always accounted for. Okay, if it's on a PHP website, the developer's name commonly nowadays doesn't actually get included, but you can talk about it. So you have to identify who developed it. That's the phrase that you could use. When it was developed, the purpose of it, the order and nature of parameters. There's a lot of things that you get on top of that in your documentation, but throughout, when you go to document, if the developers who originally made the standard module require at least that as a base information. So I'm going to show you an example. Okay. Random generator in PHP. When would I use it? To generate a random integer. A description, these are descriptions of what it looked like. It will then go into detail about what it actually does and its purpose. It also, luckily in PHP, talk to you about warnings and notes and things in there. It also has parameters, and like commonly they do, return values. This PHP documentation also goes into things beyond. So it goes into examples, warnings, and has similar features in there. If you get asked a question on what kind of requirements are there in documentation for standard modules, these are the things that you need to talk about. And that's it, guys. That's standard modules.